Cryptids. The world has often wondered what they are, what's the source of their rumours, and when you have even the likes of David Attenborough giving plausibility to, say, the Yeti or abominable snowman, it makes the scientific world and the greater world believe in them. And I guess my interest in cryptids comes from, well, I love the X-Files and also just general fascination about what if an animal happens to exist but we just don't know about it. And of course there are plenty of animals that exist that we don't know about yet. Just take a look at the deep seas, there's plenty there. But I want to look at one of the most famous ones today, in the Loch Ness Monster. Now, I'm going to Scotland next week, so I have to admit that's probably the influence into making this video. But I've also wanted to get into cryptid videos since I made this channel. I think one of my first videos, I'm like, yeah, so I'm going to make this video and this video, and then we're going to have cryptids. And haven't made the cryptids yet, so here it is. So come with me as we take a look at the truth behind the Loch Ness Monster. So before we get into talking about the monster, let's talk about where the monster lives. Loch Ness is located south of Inverness in the north of Scotland, and Inverness of course are famous for their soccer club, Inverness Caledonian Thistle. I'm not actually sure they're famous for it, but Inverness Caledonian Thistle do come from Inverness, and it is north of Loch Ness, so there you go, there's some useless knowledge for you. Loch Ness is the largest lake in Britain, in terms of volume at least, coming in at 36 kilometres in length and about 240 metres in depth. This equates to about 23 miles wide, or 23 miles long, and about 750 feet deep. Because of the topography of the lake, it can be quite deep near the shoreline, and especially when water levels vary due to waves or seeches, which are waves on lakes due to water temperature variations, it can give quite an abyssal appearance towards the edge of the lake. The abyssal appearance of Loch Ness has many people believing that it's not just fish and anything else living in there, there's a big massive monster in there. And of course this video is about the truth, and I'm going to give you the truth. Or at least the truth in the way I see it. So in order to look at this, we're going to look at the Loch Ness Monster in myth and legend. We're going to look at it in the 20th century, the 21st century. We're going to look at theories that I've come up with, or theories other people have come up with. I do have some of my own. And finally we're going to wrap it all up in a nice little Loch Ness Monster bow with conclusions. And that bit's quite short. So let's get into it and let's talk about the history of the Loch Ness Monster. So, the Loch Ness Monster in myth and legends. To be honest, you could talk about a lot. There are a lot of myth and legends going way back about the Loch Ness Monster. Now I've picked out two that seem to be the most two common ones that everyone kind of picks out when they talk about the Loch Ness Monster. The first sort of record, or I guess account, of the Loch Ness Monster within the area comes from actually stone carvings from the Pict people. Now the Pict people were people known to live in Scotland, North Scotland, around the 3rd century. So I think these stone carvings are from like 300 AD. The first record of the Pict people was about 297 AD, but obviously they were around before that. And so these stone carvings have carvings of local animals. You have some fish, you have mammals, you have a few birds, and then you have this giant animal with flippers and a long neck, and for all the world looks like a Pleistocene, and so happens to match the modern day interpretation of the Loch Ness Monster. Now, we do know that jokes do appear on stone carvings or whatever, but it does seem a bit odd, doesn't it? That these people from 300 years ago, when they were carving out the wildlife that was in their area, so happened to depict, so happened to depict a plesiosaur-like creature, which is a bit odd. The first actual written encounter of with the Loch Ness Monster came from 565 AD, with Ireland's very own St. Columba, hailing originally from Donegal, writing down how he had intervened after this sea monster attacked a bit a swimmer, I believe was how he phrased it, and he intervened, stopping the monster from attacking another man. And depending on which account you read on, which is always great when you're researching, there's different accounts of the same story, he either shouted at the beast and said, "Go back," and the beast obeyed, or he showed a crucifix to the beast and the beast retreated into the water. So again, quite an old encounter with the Loch Ness Monster, and again very similar to what the Pict people believed. Now of course you could, and I'll get into this a bit more in the theory section, but of course you could read into it that, you know, these people were just afraid of the water or something. They brushed up against the swimmer's leg, and for whatever reason the story got blown out of proportions, and all of a sudden this man is famous for fighting off the Loch Ness Monster. Doesn't really explain why the stone carvings exist though, does it? And yeah, look, we'll leave it for the theories. The Loch Ness Monster in the 20th century was first recorded, or at least notably recorded, in April 1933, when a couple out admiring the lake happened to see this large dragon-like or prehistoric animal cross the road in front of their parked car and walk into the lake. This was reported in, I think, the 2nd of May by the Inverness Courier, and in December 1933 the Daily Mail hired big game hunter Marmaduke Wetherell, what a name, Marmaduke Wetherell, love it, to go up and capture the Loch Ness Monster. Now the story goes that Wetherell, while looking to locate or capture the Loch Ness Monster, came across these footprints. Footprints said to be of the Loch Ness Monster surrounding the lake. So delighted that he's after, you know, he's getting something to track the monster with, he reports the footprints to the Daily Mail, and the Daily Mail or someone else sends out some zoologists from the Natural Science Museum, and they discover that the footprints were actually faked, and they were faked using an umbrella and a hippopotamus leg. But I do find it very funny and strange that this big game hunter was paid by a newspaper to go and locate this missing, or this massive animal, and then when he got there, after a while, he started finding fake footprints. And I'll go into this a bit more in the theories, but I'd really love to know who made the fake footprints, whether it was him or whether someone else did it to con him. But this isn't the last time we've heard of Wetherell. He'll pop up in just a minute. Now anyone familiar with the Loch Ness Monster story will know of the famous surgeon's photo. And the surgeon's photo really isn't too unusual, I guess, when you think about it. There are a lot of blurry photos around the place as claiming to be the Loch Ness Monster, which have been debunked. And the surgeon's photo, again, debunked as well, but it wasn't known to have been debunked for about 60 years. So the surgeon's photo was taken in, I think, as like the year after, I think it was like 9 months after Wetherell started looking for the Loch Ness Monster, and a few months again after the footprints. So a lot of activity going on at the lake at this time in terms of people looking for the Loch Ness Monster. You have Wetherell, you have reporters, you have the surgeon who took the photo, and then you've the people hoaxing, well, making the footprints. Now whether that's Wetherell or the surgeon or someone else, can't really say. But what we can say is that the surgeon's photo, this one, and let's be real, it's also probably in the thumbnail, is faked. It was discovered in 1994 that Marmaduke Wetherell actually helped fake this photo, which is hilarious to me. So one of his friends on his deathbed in 1994 came out with it and was like, yeah, you know that surgeon's photo? Yeah, it's faked. Marmaduke Wetherell helped fake it to get back at the hoaxers who faked the footprints, which kind of leads me to believe that Wetherell didn't actually make those footprints, but then again, he was being paid to find it, so I guess you could kind of go down the road of it's in his interest for people to still be interested in this. So fake a few footprints, fake a few photographs, Daily Mail are still going to pay you to be there. Who's to say? But what we do know is that the surgeon's photograph taken by Dr. Wilson was faked, and it was faked using a toy submarine and what was it? Toy submarine and a wooden head. But if you tie like the surgeon's photograph and you tie the rock carvings all together, this plus the story, of course, this is where you get the foundation of the Loch Ness Monster myth. And this was all 1933, 34, plus obviously you have the prehistoric ideas, and it's really just snowballed from there. So moving into the 21st century then, and with the advancement of science, we have a lot more tools in our kit to go and find these big mysterious animals. And such expeditions were encountered in like 1987. I know that's the 20th century, not the 21st, but it fits in here. So in 1987 and 2003, a sonar study was carried out of the loch to locate this big massive plesiosaur that's been living there for years and years and years and years, and nothing was ever found. And in 2018, an eDNA survey was carried out of the loch, which essentially you can like take water samples and you can essentially get traces of DNA from different animals, and really didn't find anything unusual. But what they do know, and this will become important later in the theories, is that there is a very large eel population. Not necessarily a large eel, but a large population of eels. Although there may be a large eel there too. And of course, without going into anything too specific, Loch Ness is incredibly popular for tourists. And people trying to find Loch Ness, the Loch Ness Monster that is, trying to find them and trying to like become the first person to like track it down, see it in years, like definitive proof, is really like a buzz around the area. So much so that there actually is a Loch Ness Monster live cam. And there are even photos from the live cam of supposedly monster sightings, which is really cool, and that's a YouTube channel you should check out. I'm going to link it in the description because it's related. Other than that, don't really have anything too specific from the 21st century other than the sonar and the eDNA. There are definitely loads, but I didn't really want to go into it. And what I will say though is that, like I said, loads of tourist information. It's really popular, especially for cryptids. Again, it's like baby's first cryptid, Loch Ness Monster. And you've so many like other related ones in different countries. Like you've one in Canada, you've one in Norway, pretty much anywhere with a big lake. And I'm pretty sure it's like, I'll have it definite for the theories, but it's like the Loch Ness Monster is worth like 78 million euros a year, which is a lot. And I think with that really, it's time to jump in with the theories and let's have a bit of fun. So the first theory naturally has to be, what if the Loch Ness Monster is a real life plesiosaur and it does live in Loch Ness? And you see, there's a lot of evidence for it, right? So Pict people saw it 300 years before St. Columba saw it, and again the couple in 1933 saw it. So you've three fairly well recorded individual sightings of it. Plus, if you tie in everything with like ancient sea monsters, myths and legends about large lake monsters, like you even have as a Diogo Pogo in Lake Okinawa in Canada, you've one in Norway as well, plus you have in like Norse legend you have the world serpents Jormungandr. So really there are a lot of myths, legends and tales, and of course like you have the sea monsters and the kraken and everything, and you have to wonder how much of it is from people's fear of the unknown and people writing down on like uncharted maps, here be monsters, because that's what they did.
if it was uncharted territory, they'd write here be monsters down. But you kind of have to weigh it up. Is it likely that there was a population of plesiosaurs living in Loch Ness? No, it's not. But, and then even one of the other theories is what if the couple in 1933 were right and they did see one, and it just so happened to be like an evolutionary like bystander essentially, and it was the last remaining one and just so happened to die off, and because the lake's so deep it died and it decomposed at the bottom. And I mean, yeah, you can buy into it, you can say it's a good theory. I think one of the ones that people say like, oh, but if it's a plesiosaur, it wouldn't walk across the road. And yeah, I had that thought as well, and then I was reading a bit more, and apparently the Loch Ness Monster isn't known for just residing in the loch. It can also, apparently actually lives in the caves, and because it lives in like nearby caves out of the water, this would be the reason why it escaped the sonar. As to why it escaped the eDNA, I don't think people have thought about that reason yet, but there may be some. And if you know it, leave it down in the comment section. But I think that theory kind of falls apart as soon as you bring in the eDNA. But I really like the idea, and I really wish that there actually was a real life plesiosaur living in Loch Ness, but the fact is they've been extinct for 66.5 million years, and the chances of one living in Scotland is very, very slim. In fact, probably zero. Moving on to the next one. Now my second theory, which may sound a bit far-fetched, I know, far-fetched in a very serious video about the Loch Ness Monster being real, but bear with me. So my second theory, and the second theory that there actually probably is the most documented evidence for, is that the Loch Ness Monster is actually an elephant. Now, I'm aware we're in Scotland and elephants don't reside there, but it is very important to note that in the early 1930s, and very much around the same time the couple spotted the Loch Ness Monster in 1933, there was a travelling circus within the area, and a swimming Indian elephant, I'll just presume I've cut to a swimming Indian elephant now, does look quite like, say, the depicted version of the Loch Ness Monster, or like a plesiosaur, for example. So I guess that's where that bit comes in. And then in 1933, again, same year, Bertrand Mills, which was he was an impressionado, within a travelling circus. And he offered £20,000 for anyone who could capture the Loch Ness Monster and give it to him for his circus. Now, £20,000 in nowadays for a legendary creature isn't that much really, but £20,000 in 1933 equates to about 1.5 million today, which again you probably wouldn't suggest that's very much for something as big as the Loch Ness Monster, but for a travelling circus, 1.5 million for another animal to put on show does seem quite outstretched and outlandish. So then my idea is that Bertrand Mills knew 100% for a fact that the Loch Ness Monster was actually an elephant, and one of his own elephants nonetheless. And that whole thing got promoted into the newspaper that he was going to pay 20 grand for this person to give him the Loch Ness Monster, and that gave him an absolute load of publicity, which made more people being like, oh, Bertrand Mills, yeah, I've heard of him. It's just fantastic advertising really for him. And he loses nothing and he gets his name all over the papers. But a lot of people didn't actually like the idea that the Loch Ness Monster was just an elephant. And we're going to get into that in a couple of theories time. And you'll see why a lot of people didn't like that the Loch Ness Monster might be an elephant. So the third theory, and the one that we actually have definitive proof for, is, even though there are some ecological holes in it, but what if it actually is just a really big eel? And again, like I said, there's some problems with it because of ecological knowledge on eels and etc. And like really big eels escaping notice or whatever, you can poke holes in it, absolutely. But we do have proof that there are eels living in the loch. Then again, we have proof that there's eels living in most lochs, and we've lakes and rivers and even the sea. Eels kind of live everywhere, really. You have that the largest eel, the European conger eel, was recorded at 10 foot long and weighed 350 pounds, and that was caught just outside Iceland. And then you have the moray eels, which are again about 10 foot long but only weigh 60 pounds. Then you have the New Zealand longfin eels, and they live to be over 100 years old and are the largest freshwater eel, weighing in at just over 50 pounds. So I guess what we're saying is, what if the Loch Ness Monster is actually just a really large eel that that lives really long, and it is sort of a yet undiscovered eel species that happens to be very large and bites people and can cross the road. And you know what? The more I talk, the more ridiculous this one sounds. But eels do exist in the loch. You can have really large ones and they can live a long time. How that all perfectly ties up into the Loch Ness Monster theory, well, it doesn't. But okay, it's just an eel, right? That's it. It has to be. It's an eel. Now the fourth theory I have is that it's actually a sturgeon. And this one I can actually kind of get behind. I can get behind the fact that it was an elephant as well, don't get me wrong. And I can get the fact behind people's fears and of the unknown and the dark waters or whatever. But I can really believe, at least I haven't put so much research into thinking that it's not, but I can really believe that it might be a sturgeon, because sturgeons can be quite large, they are native, and they do have a ridged back, and at least above the water it might appear from far away that it is an ancient animal. And that's about all I have to say about it, but it could be a sturgeon. It probably is more likely to be a sturgeon than an eel, and it probably is more likely to be a sturgeon than an ancient plesiosaur. Is it more likely to be a sturgeon than an elephant? That's definitely not a question I thought I'd be asking myself in college. In the similar lines of a sturgeon, then we have, maybe it's a really big tuna, maybe it's a really big salmon. And again, yeah, could be. But I think the idea is, if we're saying it's a really big tuna or a really big salmon, I think we have to ask ourselves, what is it? Like, are we trying to justify blurry images? Are tuna and salmon okay? It just doesn't make sense. Like, I can guess there might be a really big tuna and a really big salmon living in the loch, or at least there was. But it doesn't tie in with the fact that people saw things like a head or a trunk coming out of the water. It doesn't tie in for me. And like, if it is a really big tuna or a really big salmon, so what? You know, it's not worth 70 million a year, is it? And that's the crux of it, and that's what we'll come to in a bit. And then, of course, you know, what if the Loch Ness Monster really is just a bunch of birds or a bunch of floating logs that are in the lake? Because 100% there are birds that sit on logs that float in the lake. And I think these could actually, well, these probably are the source of a lot of the supposed Loch Ness Monster images. So, and again, it does, like, it takes a lot of the boxes for getting rid of the photos. Doesn't really take the boxes for getting rid of the encounters. But if we just take the encounters with a grain of salt and say, right, word of mouth, maybe they're not real, but a lot of our history comes from word of mouth. particularly old tales, and there's a lot of truth in a lot of the old tales. So you kind of have to give and take. I do believe that a lot of photos have been proven to be just birds on logs. So I think we have to take that, while it's not the absolute certainty that yes, the Loch Ness Monster never existed, it was absolutely just birds and wood. We kind of have to argue and agree that yeah, in a lot of cases, some of the evidence was just birds and logs floating in the lake. Number 7, whale penis. Not really want to say much more than that. A whale penis does look a bit like a plesiosaur head or a trunk when out of water. That is undeniable, looks very certain. However, if you bring in the Loch Ness Monster is a whale penis, then where's the goddamn whale? Now, theories 8 and 9 are very similarly linked. 8 I've sort of picked up on from other people online, and 9 I've come up with my own theory. Theory 8 is that the Loch Ness Monster is purely people profiteering on people's fears and profiteering on a good myth and a good legend. Without being too cynical about the whole thing, like I said, the Loch Ness tourism is worth 70 million a year. Now, of course, it wasn't worth that back in 1933, but Bertrand Mills did make an absolute fortune out of people coming to his circuses because people now knew who he was, because of he offered a claim for the Loch Ness Monster to be captured, to be brought to his circus. So while I'm like, okay, I really want to be a plesiosaur, I have to be down to earth and grounded and be like, realistically, there's a lot of business in people believing the Loch Ness Monster is real. I mean, look, I'm making a video on it. There are hundreds of documentaries made on the Loch Ness Monster and it being real. This is nothing new. I'm not doing any groundbreaking work here. I just thought it'd be a really good video to make. But other people have made a living off it. And remember I said that there were some people who weren't so happy with the idea that the Loch Ness Monster might have been an elephant? Yeah, so one of those was a fellow by the name of George Edwards. Now, George Edwards, what do we know about him? We know that George Edwards is currently the skipper of a tour boat for Loch Ness. Do I have his name? I do. He's a skipper of the Nessie Hunter on Loch Ness. And I wonder why he'd be upset if the whole thing was discovered to be an elephant from the 1930s. I can't imagine why he'd be upset that the Loch Ness Monster wasn't real and it was actually just an elephant. I can't put my finger on why he'd be upset. Of course, look, blowing that out of proportion, and the fact is George Edwards isn't alone. There are loads of people around the world, in fact, who profiteer off the idea that the Loch Ness Monster might exist or might not exist. And I think it's the uncertainty of it, really. But you have it all over the world. Like the X-Files essentially made an episode, what was it called? Like Quagmire. They made an episode of Quagmire in like season 4, where essentially Mulder and Scully go to this lake to hunt Big Blue, and Big Blue turned out to be an alligator, or supposedly turned out to be an alligator. Now, of course, Loch Ness Monster isn't an alligator. I haven't put it in as a theory because an alligator wouldn't survive in the north of Scotland. But the fact is, there are a lot of people making a lot of money off of cryptids in general. And you know what? Why not? It leaves people's imaginations open. And I like the idea that people are learning a bit of science, even if some of it is pseudoscience or fake science. But it helps people learn that we're not alone, and there are so many more discoveries to be had And theory number 9, my very own one, the Daily Mail newspaper are behind it all. Now, I'm not necessarily trying to suggest that the Daily Mail came up with the idea of the Loch Ness Monster, and they're not time travelers, they didn't go back in time and carve into the rocks. Although they might have. But, yeah, I'm not saying any of that, but I'm thinking, my idea is, from 1933 onwards, they've made a lot of money based on the Loch Ness Monster. Remember Marmaduke Wetherell? He was the big game hunter hired to go and locate the Loch Ness Monster. Yeah, well, he was hired by the Daily Mail in December 1933. And then when the footprints that turned out to be a hoax were found, they were printed in the Daily Mail again as proof before later being retracted as a hoax. Not retracted. I don't think they actually retracted the story, but I think they just made a new headline saying that they were a hoax, which is grand. And then remember the surgeon's photograph, which was taken by Dr. Roberts, Dr. Richards, Dr. Wilson, Dr. Robert Wilson even, and that was faked, but that photo was also published in the Daily Mail. Again, just like May 1934, around that period, and that turned out to be a hoax by Marmaduke Wetherell to get back at someone for making the hoax footprints. So in my own head, I'm like, Daily Mail pays Wetherell to find monster. Daily Mail pays someone else to make footprints. Wetherell finds them. Then Wetherell gets pissed and he makes the fake surgeon's photograph, which they get Robert Wilson to take. Obviously, Robert Wilson didn't know he was taking a fake photograph, but Wetherell did hoax it, or did fake it. But what if Wetherell was paid by the Daily Mail to make the hoax footprints as well? And that bit doesn't really make sense to me, because like a lot of people have thrown it out there, but I don't see why he would get back at someone else if he made fake footprints, if you get me. But maybe he did. But anyway, the Daily Mail on average have about 5 or 6 articles about the Loch Ness Monster a year, and as recently as 2021 they released like a new groundbreaking article stating how essentially the whole thing was, well, no one's proved that the Loch Ness Monster doesn't exist. And I'm like, you're still really milking this like 88 years later. I don't know. I feel that the Daily Mail are a lot more behind, at least a lot more behind promoting the idea of the Loch Ness Monster, and continuing to promote it than they should be. Of course, maybe it is just a coincidence that they happen to be the newspaper that hired your man to locate it. Then he found hoax footprints, and then there was a hoax photograph, and that was published in the Daily Mail. And then ever since they keep publishing stuff about the Loch Ness Monster. Again, it could be faked. To conclude the story then, what we do know is that the Loch Ness Monster is worth 70 million to the region. It probably was an elephant, or at least some of the claims were an elephant, and then the Daily Mail ran with it, and it just kept going and snowballing. One thing I haven't mentioned throughout this, I didn't want to debunk my plesiosaur theory, but the actual Loch Ness has only existed for about 10,000 years. So the idea that the loch was a evolutionary, like, secluded area, I guess, for want of a better word, for a plesiosaur population, well, it only existed for 10,000 years, and they've been extinct for like 65.5 million years, so where were they hiding before that? Well, I thought it was really cool to go into this, and I hadn't done a video like this before. Do I think the Loch Ness Monster exists? No. I really wish it did. I really did. really do wish it existed, but I don't think it actually does. But I really love cryptids, and I love doing these videos. They're so cool, and I love to just sit down and like top up my research knowledge. I'm like, oh, I have so much of this, but like I need so much of this, and then just join it together for one big video like this. And I hope you all enjoyed it. I'm not sure how many of you will be watching towards the end of this. To be honest, I'm not really sure how many of you will watch it at all. Some videos are great, some videos don't. As you can see, even in this video, the background has changed like twice, and I think we're going to settle on this one. I think it's really, really good. But anyway, thank you for watching if you got this far, and we'll catch you next time.